This is Join Us in France, episode 354. 354. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel during the pandemic. This week, there's a big change, but it only affects unvaccinated visitors from the US. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elyse about Moissac, a city in the southwest of France where we both live. And you might be wondering, what is this place? You've probably never heard of it. Elyse has done guide work in Moissac, and I visited it recently, so we have some things to share that will make it possible for you to choose whether or not you'd like to make it one of your stops. After my chat with Elyse, I'll tell you how the health pass is making it possible for French associations to get back to normal at last. As you can guess, all soccer clubs, choirs, theater groups, sewing groups, as well as a million of other clubs all had to cancel everything since March 2019. Well, they're back thanks to the health pass, and I'll let you in on how that works in France. If you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by visiting joinusinfrance.com/boutique to check out my cookbook, Join Us at the Table, my Paris tours on the Voice Map app, and my very popular itinerary review service where I help you craft the best vacation in France specifically for you. Follow Addicted to France on Instagram to see my photos of Moissac. I will post them this week. And the best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. Can you do me a big favor and whitelist Annie at joinusinfrance.com as soon as you subscribe? That's how you can make sure that the newsletter doesn't end up in your spam folder. Also, reply to the newsletter. Your email system figures if you're writing back, we must be pen pals. And it's a lot more likely to show you future emails from me. I fully intend to make the newsletter the most useful newsletter about France out there. You want to make sure you get it. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
It's very hot today in Toulouse.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very hot.
We are inside Annie's air-conditioned house. My house is not air-conditioned. And yesterday it was over 100 degrees outside.
It got hot.
It's supposed to be the
Same.
Well, we were complaining last week about it being cool and rainy.
Yes,
so
this summer 2021 has been not super hot, really, compared to previous summers we've had. So let's be grateful for that. But it is definitely very hot today.
Yeah, it just seems like the swinging back and forth is more to extremes, whatever. Yeah.
It's not that extreme, but it goes, between 80 and 100 kind of type of thing. Anyway, today we're talking about Moissac. In the southwest of France, in Occitanie, the region where we both live. I never know if I should say Occitania or Occitanie. Do you have a suggestion? What would English-speaking people say? Occitanie or Occitania?
I think English-speaking people would say Occitania. I think.
Yeah.
But officially, it's Occitanie.
Yeah.
So, and I've actually heard people say Occitan. But that's the language.
Yeah, that's the language.
So,
yeah, this problem pops up with a few regions. I mean, like Normandy, IE, or with a Y.
It's not much different.
Yeah, not much different. But Occitania is not much different either.
No.
So I don't know which one.
I don't think it matters. It doesn't. This is the Pays of Oc.
Yes,
Nobody speaks Oc anymore, but it's the Pays of Oc.
Yeah, so it is. So southwest of France, where we both live. As a matter of fact, Moissac is not very far from where we live.
No, it's not very far. It, in fact, is exactly 55 kilometers from here. No,
from here, or from the center of Toulouse?
Well, I count from the center. When I pop this up on the computer to see the distances, I don't say from Annie's house.
Really?
You're in the north, so we can take the shave off a few kilometers if we're going to leave from here.
I can't believe that you don't say from Annie's house.
I don't say from Annie's
Google
house.
Google obviously knows where Annie's house
is. Next time I'm going to do that. We'll see what happens. No, it's if you go on the autoroute, you actually go in the direction of Montauban, and you keep on going, and then you actually have to turn off the main autoroute. But it's just about an hour's drive from here, and it's about a half an hour drive from Montauban, which we have recently talked about.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, when I went to take photos, I did both in the same day.
You did both in the same day, which is kind of a logical thing to do. I mean, it's very possible. The thing about Moissac, it's a small town. It's just about 13,000 people, but it's also very easy to get to by train. So if you don't have a car available, because it is for historical purposes a site extremely interesting to go and visit. But if you do not have a car available, it is very easy to get there by train, and the train does in fact it goes through Montauban. It's the line that goes from Toulouse to Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm. And it
stops there. And I don't remember exactly, but it's a little bit of a walk from the train station to the main point of interest, which is, of course, the famous Abbey that's there. But it's definitely doable.
Yeah.
It's not
and there's probably regional buses that go there.
Yes, I'm sure there are,
Yeah.
So it's also a place you can get to if you're staying anywhere in the region. If you're staying a little bit further north, if you're staying, you can get there from Albi. It's a little bit longer. You can go to Castel-Sarrazin, which is a small town nearby. There are lots of places that are nearby. If you're Moissac is very, very interesting for anybody interested in the history of medieval architecture, and of course because it is a major stop on the route to Compostelle.
Right, Chemin Saint Jacques de Compostelle.
And so it is a town. The town itself is not, but the Abbey is a World UNESCO Heritage Site. And so, of course, that brings in a lot of tourists, because Moissac is actually famous for one other thing, and that is for its chasselas grape. It's Moissac actually, except for the Abbey, all of its economy is based on the fact that it's in the midst of a huge fruit growing region, and the plums, apples, pears, kiwis all grow in this area, and they are. This is the collect center, basically, for all the fruit. It's really a major, major fruit-growing area of France.
Yeah, and these orchards are very well tended to. Like they have systems to protect the trees from birds, heat. Anything that can down from the sky that could. So they have like these nets that they are ready to deploy at any time. Yeah, it's not like your average fruit growing place.
No,
the orchards are very well tended.
They're very well tended to, and of course you're right. It's like a gauze. It looks when you drive by, especially if you're on the train, because the train takes you right through the center of all these huge orchards. It looks like it's gauze. It's very pretty. It's not like plastic that's covering it or anything like that. And yes, it's typical of the area. Mm-hmm. And one of the specialties of this area is this very famous and relatively expensive table grape called the chasselas.
Yeah, it's good.
Which is very, very, very sweet. And it grows only in this area. I'm not even sure exactly why. It must have to do with something in the soil. It's a very pale green-white little grape, small grape, that only comes out in basically September, I think September to the beginning of October, and is shipped all over France. A lot of it goes up to Paris because it's a grape that people want because it is so sweet and delicious. And it is an AOC fruit, which means it's really like a wine. It comes right from there. And so that's the other thing that is famous in Moissac.
The Abbey's good.
The Abbey's good. The Abbey's good. So Moissac, now I know you were there very recently.
Yep.
I've been there many, many times, but I have not been back in a couple of years. The
Pandemic and all.
Yeah, pandemic. Pandemic has done everything, and basically, Moissac is famous, or certainly aside from the fruit, for it's been famous for a very, very long time, and one of the reasons is because starting way back in the earliest part of the Middle Ages, there was a Benedictine Abbey established there. Now, Moissac is kind of hilly. It's not mountainous. And the abbey, as was the case often in the earliest part of the Middle Ages, what am I talking about? We're talking about the 600s, 700s, really a long time ago. The abbeys and the monasteries in general were often built in these hidden away little places. And it's still woodsy around there, but you can imagine that long ago it must have been just lots of forests around there. And so the abbey is actually built up against a hill.
Yeah.
It's like the curve of the beginning of a valley, and it's like, we're going to be cozy. We're going to back our behinds up against this hill, and we're going to just stay right here,
Right. And they have, from the abbey, they have signs that point you to a beautiful point of view, like up on top of the hill. And there's also a statue of the Virgin Mary up there. There's a couple of gîtes for pilgrims up there, where you have a nice overlook over the thing, over the whole town.
Oh, the whole town.
And I hoofed it up there to take photos. And it's pretty steep. It says 10-minute walk. Well, it took me 20 minutes, and it was steep. I mean, it was very steep.
Yeah, and Annie's a good walker. So,
and when I got to the top, I saw that there was a parking lot right back there, and I was like, I could have driven.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got some nice photos of the whole area from the top. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's really pretty. Yeah. I mean, it's not the most dramatically splendid area. It's nice, and as an area. And so, in fact, what they have discovered recently meaning, I guess we could say in the last 40, 50 years, which is pretty much what they find almost everywhere in France, is that the abbey was in fact built on top of Roman ruins. And there is something, for those people out there who have this idea of energy lines in the earth and why certain places are sacred. I mean, I've met a few people like that. I've actually taken a few people like that around on tours. Maybe there's something to it, because whatever it is, it's like the Celts had a temple there. The Romans went, that looks like a good place. We'll build ours there. And then when the Roman Empire fell and the Christianity came in, it's like, they already did this. Maybe it's a good spot. Let's do it again,
Well, but it makes sense to me, because if you're going to build a structure, it's easier to build it on top of another one, because it's already been like all the ground leveling and whatever has been done. There's probably not been trees and tree roots and things like that for a long, So it's easier than chopping down some trees and starting from scratch.
That's
honestly.
True. But it's a very rational explanation.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. But energy lines also work.
Energy lines also work,
If you insist on the energy lines.
This morning I want energy lines.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Whatever.
Let's try the both things at the same time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it happens that just a teeny little bit of background information, just really because if people don't know what I'm talking about, the order of Benedictine monks was the very first important order of monks. That is, there's a group of monks that have a set of rules, and in this case, it's the Benedictine monks. They were the very first, and they established abbeys and monasteries all over France. The most important one ever, which is now unfortunately a ruin, but is really still impressive to see, is Cluny, which is in the Burgundy area, and they were the head. They were the guys that were in.
It's in ruin, but it's been rebuilt.
No. The church is a ruin.
Okay.
You can visit the site, and there's a lot of stuff that explains it. And of course, there's a little bit of a new church next to it. But the ancient abbey and church, they're gone. But anyway, what happened was that the second most important Benedictine monastery abbey was in fact the one in Moissac. It was designated to be the chief center of monastic orders for the entire Southwest, which included at the time, this is a long time ago, Aquitaine, Occitania, all of this region going almost up to the Loire River. And so it became very, 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 very important. And by virtue of that, become very rich, because this is indeed what used to happen. If anybody really wants to understand any of this stuff, and it's too obscure to figure it out in terms of what happened in France, read Ken Follett's books about the Middle Ages and the building of the cathedrals and the abbeys. Yeah. It's exactly the same. I mean, it's...
Yeah, it's true that book is quite approachable. And
it's approachable, and it gives you an idea. Anyway,
I think the evil guy is too evil in that book.
But that makes good books, He's
but he's too evil. Okay. I think the author enjoyed it a little bit too much.
Don't watch out for the book I write. My bad guy's gonna be bad. In fact, Moissac was really famous, and because it was so wealthy, because various lords and various bishops gave it money, and of course this is really how these monasteries and abbeys wound up becoming so wealthy, it had an enormous prestige. It also, just as a way of giving an idea of what was going on, and this is what we call still the earlier part of the Middle Ages, it was attacked, it was sacked, and it was rebuilt, first by the Moors, then by the Vikings, who came up the river, because it's the Tarn River, which goes all the way into the Gironde at Bordeaux, and then the Huns. Mm. So it was on the route between Toulouse and Bordeaux, whether you go by waterway or whether you go by whatever was considered to be a road way back then. And it really was in the center of where everybody went, it's a good place to attack, let's go. So, and in spite of that, by the year 1100, it was the second most important monastery and abbey in all of France, which of course is saying quite a lot in this country that had probably 1,000 monasteries and abbeys.
Now, it's pretty funny because I'm sure the people came, the pilgrims anyway, I'm sure they came to see the relics. And to give you an example of how things have changed so much, when I went, I looked around and saw a lot of nice things in the abbey, and they have a little museum attached to the abbey, and it was all very good. And when I left and I went to the bookstore, I opened the book about the Chemin de Compostelle, and in there it said that one of the things to not miss at Moissac was this finger of a saint. I can't even remember which saint. And I showed the book to the people at the desk, and I said, I didn't see this finger. Where is it? And the guy took me in, and he showed me the finger.
And I don't remember which reliquary it's in.
It's a teeny tiny.
Well, they're always teeny tiny.
Yeah. So it's. I took a photo.
Okay,
I'll show you a photo. Nowadays, we go places not even knowing that that's the reason why people went so long ago. They went to worship that one relic.
That relic, right.
And today, you totally miss it. If you don't know that it's there, you totally miss it. So
yeah, well, it's true that nowadays, since it is something that's become very popular again, the idea of doing part or all of the route, it's usually a very personal meditation. It's not what it was, of course, at that time.
Right.
Which was indeed to go because certain saints were, or pieces of them, were in specific places. In fact, interestingly enough, because the fact that the monastery was already very, very powerful and well known, it was in the year 1047. So really, we're getting on almost to exactly 1,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. That it was at that point, exactly that year, that it was officially made a stop on the pilgrimage road. Ah. It hadn't been before then. But the reason why, very simply, is that was the period of time when the pilgrimages became so very, very important. Because before that, people didn't really do that many pilgrimages.
Right.
And since it is in a place that's strategically a good place, you have 3 or 4 different routes to get to Compostelle, which of course is in Galicia, which is the extreme northwest of Spain. Mm-hmm. But Moissac is in a perfect place to converge 3 of these routes. And so because it was important, because it had relics, etc., it became the place to stop if you didn't come through Toulouse, or even if you did, because Toulouse, of course, was also a stop on the road. But you could also go Toulouse and then Moissac, or you could come down from the north and just go straight to Moissac and then head into Basque Country and go over the top.
Yeah.
Okay. What happened after that, thanks to the added riches of being on the pilgrimage road, is that it acquired an enormous number of medieval manuscripts. Now, books that were made before printing are called codex. Mm-hmm. These are not scrolls. This is a book, but the term used for something that was made by hand, printed, written out by hand beforehand, it is a codex.
It's a reference point.
Moissac became an extremely important scriptorium.
Yeah, and they have some beautiful displays of that.
Beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that by the 1200s, it had the most important library in all of France. And over 170 of these codex. Now, these are Bibles and texts translated from Greek, from Latin, from other languages, etc. But imagine that it was considered to be the most important library in all of France with 170 of these codex, okay? At a time when you had monks sitting and writing with this little piece of feather, line by line, and some of them were illuminated manuscripts and everything else. It so happens that 125 of these are still in existence, and they are in the National Museum in Paris. Mm-hmm. And not National Museum, National Library, the Mitterrand Library in Paris. Mm-hmm. And you can actually ask to see a couple of them. You have to wear white gloves and all this kind of stuff. But so the Moissac was just super important. It was just an extremely important place. And its importance basically lasted through to the end of the 1300s. Now, why, after a certain amount of time, a lot of these monasteries suddenly stopped being so important? To be honest, I really, really don't know. It happens that Moissac suffered all of the problems of the Southwest. That is, the war between the English and the French, eventually the war of religions between the Protestants and the Catholics. So, of course, what happened was that as we get into the late Middle Ages, into the Renaissance, a lot of these abbeys and monasteries, for some reason, lose a lot of their importance. Even though the Catholic Church is still very powerful, there's a change in the way people deal with the religion. And so the monasteries lose a lot of the monks, a lot of the brothers that live there, and they lose their influence. And, of course, Moissac, unfortunately, suffered through the period of the War of Religions, the war before that with the English and the French fighting over the region, because it's really on the border of Aquitaine and Occitania. And then eventually the French Revolution, which came in and did not really destroy the buildings, which is unusual because many of these abbeys, in fact, were really destroyed during the French Revolution. But a lot of the treasures were taken out, a lot of the furniture was taken out, pieces that could be moved were taken out. And interestingly enough, almost without knowing why, most of the buildings were left intact. So it suffered more from the erosion of time and history and changes in what people did than anything else. And one last thing in its history before we actually talk about why the building is now a World UNESCO Heritage Site for its architecture. I didn't know this, but it turns out that the entire town, not the abbey specifically, but the entire town of Moissac was heroic during World War II. And the entire town, including the local préfet, who's the head of the police, among other things, they saved hundreds of Jewish children who had been brought to the town because there was an organization of scouts that took these children there. And everyone in the town participated in hiding the children, making false papers for all of them. And when eventually in 1942 the Germans came through, because of course before that it had not been, it was a free zone, the children were dispersed into the countryside, all of them hidden away. And as far as anyone knows, one of them was captured and given over. So this is a unique thing that the entire town was that valiant and that courageous. And it's apparently famous for that reason. It's pretty interesting to know that, you know.
A lot of places either didn't see the writing on the wall or refused to see it.
Right.
And were supposedly taken by surprise by German invaders.
Right.
But
it's sadly true also that not every town had a préfet who went against the regulations of Vichy. And
definitely not. Yeah.
So this is something for the town to be proud of, actually, in its history. So now, why is today, aside from the fact that it is still a major stop on the route to Compostelle, why is it a World UNESCO Heritage Site? Well, it has to do with the architecture and the sculpture that is still there in both the cloister, in a little bit in the church, but the church is actually the least important of the three parts, and this absolutely incredible and unique doorway. The doorway, which is, if you stand on this huge esplanade which leads to the church, which is not the way you get into the cloister. The cloister, you have to go sort of around the back and another doorway where the tourist office is.
And as a matter of fact, it's very easy to miss the cloister entrance.
Yes.
It's not obvious. Like when you walk towards the church, the esplanade, you see that glorious entrance, as you mentioned, and the entrance to the cloister, you have to get out of the church, and if you're facing the church, it's going to be on the left.
Right.
And don't miss that, because a lot of people, I bet, just go and leave the church and go home. I don't know what the big deal was.
Right. Or if you there is a parking lot up above, which is the way I've always come. And if you park up above, the steps take you right down, and you really are there to the entrance to the cloister and the tourist office. So the building, basically, except for part of the church, dates from approximately the year 1100. This is old.
Yeah.
This is really as old as, and sometimes a little older than the Church of Saint-Sernin here in Toulouse. Now, in that time, in the Middle Ages, a sculptor was an artist, but a sculptor was also a stonemason, was also a builder, and there was no distinction made. So no one has any idea who these people were who did the work on this cloister and monastery. What they did, though, and that is one of the reasons why it's so prized, because maybe there were others that kind of look like this, but they certainly don't exist anymore, is they used their wonderful imagination. So the doorway, which leads you into the church, and in fact does have an entrance into the cloister, but is no longer available for people to use in the back.
It probably does.
In the entranceway.
In every church, there was a link between the cloister and the church.
Right.
It's just, you can't do it that way anymore. You have to exit the church first.
Right. So the doorway, and it is great to kind of see it from a distance at first before you come up to it close, is unique because it's enormous. It's 6.5 meters wide, and it's got scalloped stone, scalloped literally like scalloped, like you use scalloped edges on pinking shears, on a piece of fabric or something like that. The central posts in the doorway are scalloped stone, and they have in the middle and on the sides extremely elaborate and very unique sculpture. All of this is relief sculpture. Of course, it's not very, very full volume or anything. But what you do when you go up close is you take a good look at it, and you notice that you have animals that blend into saints, that blend into flowers, that blend into animals, that blend into saints. And the whole thing is absolutely remarkable. You have, on the two sides of the doorway, you have St. Paul and St. Jerome. St. Jeremiah, who were very important in the list of saints. Certainly St. Paul was at the time. And on the two sides of the entranceway, on one side, on the right side, looking at it, you have the scenes of the life of Christ. All of this in relief sculpture. It reads like a bande dessinée. It reads like a comic book in strips going across, one layer on top of the other. And on the left side, looking at the doorway, you have scenes that are lessons about what not to do. No, don't Don't be a person who is greedy. Give your money to the poor. Don't be a person
and
who's
to the church
and just this vice, and things like that. So, and this is very typical. And above the horizontal strip of the doorway, which is called the lintel, you have a massive relief sculpture in a semicircle of what is called, this is the term for it, it's called a Christ in Majesty, which is kind of interesting. But what you have is a huge relief sculpture of an image of Christ sitting on a throne. He's dressed as a Roman, which is really interesting because this was done in the 1100s. They must have had a lot of Roman runes left around them. So, it's like you want to talk about prestige, put them in Roman togas, And like all Romanesque sculpture, which is really the style of the time, what's wonderful and fun to look at is you notice that the heads are very big, the feet are very tiny. Everything is in proportion to what's important in the sculpture. So he's sitting on this throne. He's got his right hand up with the two fingers raised, peace sign. That's where we get it from. And the left hand pointing down, which is a way of saying, you want to be one of those who goes to heaven, do it this way. You want to go to hell, do it that way.
Yeah.
And underneath him is a strip. It's probably my favorite part of the whole doorway. It's called the 24 Wise Men. And you see this in a lot of on a lot of churches that as part of this relief sculpture. And they are all holding a musical instrument. And every single one of them is different. And they're all looking up. And you can tell by the expressions on their faces, they're going, whoa, just what happened here, And they're really small in relation to him. They're high up, so to be honest, I have no idea actually how big they are. But if you take a good look at them, you will see that every single one of them is different. They all also have teeny little feet, and they're holding each of them some kind of stringed instrument. And each one is turned in a slightly different position, and they're all kind of going, whoa, The one thing we don't realize anymore is that all of this was colored at the time. There's no color left on any of this. But if you could imagine what this could look like if everything was
stone,
painted with beautiful colors everywhere, just like, the doorways of Notre Dame. So this doorway is extremely, extremely unique. And it is only part of what makes the Abbey very, very special from the point of view, really, of architecture and of medieval art.
Now, to see the photos, because I've taken photos of much of this that you're describing, I'll post them on the Instagram account for the show, which is called Addicted to France.
Okay. And get maybe to see a little bit of these little bad guys, a couple of the devils close up. You never know.
Right, right.
Now, the other thing, the church has, I'm going to kind of leave for last because to me it's really the least impressive and interesting part of this. But the other part that's extremely important from the historical point of view of art and architecture is the cloister. And the cloister is actually really, really remarkable because it has 76 columned arches all the way going around it, right? And many of those are what are called historied arches. That is,
right.
Arch has, it's these thin little columns that hold up, if you've ever visited a cloister. And the top part is called a capital. And basically, it's usually an upside-down triangle. Sometimes it's squarish, but most of the time it's kind of an upside-down triangle. And in the past, and in many other places, the decorative elements, this is all basically inspired by and copied from Roman and Greek stuff, was leaves, animals, interweaving with each other. It's very beautiful the way they kind of use these lines and kind of do the four sides, one side leading into the other. But Moissac is the very first cloister in an abbey to not only have that, but to have what are called these historied capitals, which means they tell a story from the Bible.
Right.
And there are 46 of them. There's a paper that you can get when you go in that gives you a list and gives you the numbers, so you orient north, south, east, west, so you can follow them around. And some of them are still in such good condition that when you look at them, you can really read the story. And
you can recognize. The characters.
The characters, and
like you can see the story of the Bible and the Ark and the Noah and all of that. You can see it.
You can see it. You can see Daniel in the lion's den.
Yeah.
You can see Jesus entering Jerusalem. There are scenes. There's one with Adam and Eve. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them,
and they are labeled, and they will give you a piece of paper that labels everything, and you can count the columns and go right to the one.
You can go around, and of course, and this was the very first time. Now, I need to say this from just a purely artist point of view. Imagine a stonemason is given a block of limestone, and he has to not only take this square or cube or whatever you want to call it and make it into this kind of upside down pyramid, but he has to make a story that includes everything that you're supposed to know about in the story, going from one side to the other, 4 sides, blending from one side to the other with very little interruption, and all of this in relief sculpture without breaking the stone. Mm-hmm. Okay. So,
they were incredibly gifted.
They were incredible. They were absolutely incredible. And of course,
and practiced. I mean, super practiced and very specialized, because, I mean, being a stonemason at the time was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
You could make a good living.
Yes.
Now, in The Pillars of the Earth, the novel, he likes his stonemason to be starving most of the time and from place to place, whatever. Honestly, most of these people who were that gifted and that talented did not go starving.
No.
Okay. That's not how it went.
No.
The book makes it sound a lot worse than it really was.
I mean, no, you're absolutely right. It was considered to be very prestigious and very honored to be a stonemason, especially if you worked on a church or an abbey.
Yeah.
And there were ateliers, there were really groups of artists that worked. And one of the things that's interesting about Moissac, it was not destroyed. So most of these columns and capitals are, in fact, the originals that date from exactly the year 1100. And we know this because one of the side plaques that are interspersed between these columns shows one of the 2 abbots who was the head of the abbey, who was in charge of hiring these stonemasons to do that. And there is an inscription that says this was done in the year 1100.
Yeah.
And there you are. I mean, we don't need to worry about when was this done and who did it. And it is a fact that they have figured out that it's the same artists who worked on all of the cloister and the doorway there that worked on a good part of the Church of Saint-Sonin here in Toulouse. Mm. And the way they know all of this is not because somebody signed their work, but simply that they check the style.
Yeah.
And so they figure, okay, whatever it is, it's the same group of people. It may not have been one person, it's the same group of people. But the cloister is really, really remarkable.
Yeah, it's a really good one.
It's really
and there's this massive tree in the center.
Yes.
And it was funny because when I was there was a group of people who all went around the tree and held hands and I don't know what they were doing.
Well, you know why?
Energy lines or something.
Well,
whatever.
in this case, it may not have even been energy lines because every cloister always had a cedar or a cypress. And the reason why is because it's a reference to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So this was probably a group that were there to pray. And the cedar, it's a cedar that's there. It's not a cypress. It's a cedar. It's a magnificent cedar.
It's ginormous.
Ginormous. Absolutely ginormous. And they were probably praying.
Yeah.
Every cloister had a well as well. Mm-hmm. Because they had to have their own source of water. Yeah. And usually had an herb and medicinal garden in the center. I don't know if there was one in the case of Moissac.
Today it's just open space.
It's a very big cloister.
Yeah, it's large and it's gorgeous.
And there are still a few side rooms. A part of it was truncated by the arrival of the trains. We ride right behind the cloister.
You can hear them going by the cloister.
You can hear them going by. In fact, one of the scandals was that in the middle of the 1830s, when they started building train lines everywhere, they wanted to destroy the entire monastery.
Goodness gracious.
Moissac actually has the honor of being one of the very first buildings ever put on the Historic Monuments List of France, 1840. So it's among the very, very first. And many people put up a petition. This is in the 1830s because they were going to just raise it to put through the train line. So what did they do? They said, okay, we'll just take out the dining hall and the kitchens that belong to the monastery, and we'll put the train line behind. So in fact, the train line runs right behind the cloister, and you can feel it vibrating sometimes as you go through. Yeah. So there are a few buildings. Did you go up to the top? Did you go up the staircase to the upper level? There's a wooden staircase in one corner that takes you upstairs that just gives you a slightly different view. In the cloister.
The cloister, I don't think I did, no.
But anyway, there are still a few rooms off of the cloister that have some pieces left from other parts of the abbey that are no longer there. But these are the two parts that are considered to be so prestigious and important because of their originality and the quality of what they have and their age, that this is what has made Moissac, a World UNESCO Heritage Site for the buildings itself. And of course, then you have the church. And now the church was half built again in the 1400s. So when you go inside it, it's a big open space. It's a Southern Gothic style church. You will see most of what you see is in fact Gothic style, but what's called Southern Gothic style. It's got a kind of very pretty orange yellow painting of geometric forms on the walls and the ceiling. There are some very beautiful early Renaissance sculpture, various pieces carved in wood, a couple in stone. The only part that's as old as the cloister and the doorway is the very, very last part, which is where the altar is. That's the only part that's left from the 1100s, actually, because it was the church itself was the part that was the most damaged and was rebuilt a couple of hundred years later. But what's fun and what I like is that when you go to the deep end where the altar is in the church, if you go to the right or the left of it, they've left it open so that you can see that they were doing some archaeological digging there, and there are some Roman ruins. Mm-hmm. So that is how they know that, in fact, the whole structure was built on top of a Roman structure that was there before. Otherwise, the church is not that different from a lot of the churches that you see. One of the things that you notice if you go back outside and up the big esplanade that's in front is if you take a look at the building, you will see that the church is half stone and half brick because it was rebuilt. And the second part is the part that's brick. And the church tower, which is above the doorway, is ancient, so it's all made of stone. Mm-hmm. So from a historical point of view, from the point of view of being a place that has a certain aura because it's on the route to Compostelle, and because it's a wonderful, wonderful place to get an idea of what the architecture and the sculptural art was like in that part of the Middle Ages, Moissac is really a fun place to stop and do a visit to.
Yeah. I mean, I thought the rest of the town was fine.
Yeah.
You know.
It doesn't have anything special.
No, it's not anything special. It's not ugly or anything. It's just, a normal French town. Right around the cloister and the cathedral, you have some nice cafes and restaurants. The Esplanade has some nice places. I wouldn't spend more than half a day there.
Exactly.
You know, just looking around, but it's pleasant, and it's got a lot of. If you like church art, you will really enjoy it. Yes. And usually I try not to post too much church art in the Addicted to France account on Instagram because, I don't want to turn it into a church art thing. But for this week, it's going to be a lot of that. This is what it's about.
Yeah,
really.
I think what's good to do is imagine this not from a, personally, this is me anyway, but not from a religious point of view, but just the skill of the work that went into doing these things, because it is really rather remarkable. And you have to imagine that this was done in the year 1100. Okay, and this is all hand carved. And the stonemasons who work on places like this, what's fun is that even though they were given the script, basically said, okay, we would like this saint over here or this story over here, then they were left to do their own style and figure out how to do this in their own way. And all of this was colored. Remember that.
And somehow they all came out with the chapiteaux, how do you say that in English?
Capitals.
The capitals of about the same size.
Yes.
You know, I mean, from a distance, they all look like evenly shaped.
Yes.
But just carved with different stories.
With different things, you know, and some of them are one column, some of them are double columns. But you can imagine 2 or 3 artists, sculptors, working on these. You know, one guy saying, "Which story are you working on?" You know, what I'm doing leaves today. You know, this is a little bit more boring. You know, and the other one saying, "Hey, but you're not doing this story. This is hard. I'm not sure how I'm going to finish this." You know, it is. For me, when you see all of this and you look at even the big semicircle above the doorway, which is called a tympanum, by the way, it's a technical term for it. What's fun, because I don't relate to it from a religious point of view, it's just the artistry that went into the making of all of this, and also the fact that this is a period of time when nobody cared about realism, which I like.
Yeah.
You know, so you have teeny feet, big heads, sometimes big hands. You have bodies twisted into positions that are absolutely impossible unless you're a pretzel, you know, I mean, things like this. And I just can imagine what it must have been like if you could still see it with its beautiful color on it, and why this would impress people at the time.
And the bookstore in front of the entrance of the cloister was very nice.
Yes, it's a very nice little book.
They extracted several.
They took some of your money.
Yeah, they took quite a bit of my money. Yeah, because they had it was well done. You know, it wasn't too much stuff.
Right.
Some of these bookstores outside of places like that just have way too much stuff, and it's overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed and I just leave.
Right.
But that one, they did a good job at attracting my eye. And looky over here.
Right.
You know?
And they have books that are about tourism, not just about the Abbey. You know, they have books about the region. They have books about visiting other places in the region. And if I remember correctly, there's a very beautiful scale model in the center that shows what the entire thing looked like when it was complete.
I think so, yes. I think so.
So it's a very nice... certainly not more than a half day if you stop for having a quick lunch or coffee or something.
Yeah, it's a half a day affair, but it's nice. A nice half a day.
It's a nice half a day, and you can get there pretty much from any direction if you have a car.
Yeah, with a car, it's perfect.
Really...
And don't believe them when they say it's only 10 minutes to the point of view. It's a good 20 minutes. And it's steep, man. It's very steep.
and that's what you get your energy lines.
And they have, I saw several pilgrims who were there. Some of them were resting at the cafe. Some of them were walking. And they have people in the church to welcome the pilgrims and stamp their things, you know. And there's a lot of signs that you see with pilgrim services and, a hostel for pilgrims and this and that. So there's a lot of services related to the pilgrims.
I don't know if everybody knows this, for anybody out there who imagines ever trying to do even a part of it. But the basic rule is that you get one night free in every stop.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes. You don't have to pay. The stops like Conques, like Moissac, and even Toulouse. There's actually a house for people in Toulouse. If you have the card that proves that you really are doing the pilgrimage route, you have the right to have one night of being lodged wherever that place is for free. Huh. But you have to reserve ahead of time because it's not easy to get a spot.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other, I mean, if you don't mind paying a little bit, some of these places didn't look like they could charge possibly very much. Right. Because it's very a hostel, basic. Usually, yeah. They were very basic. But yeah, there's lots of places for pilgrims and walkers and whatever, So, yeah, fun place. I enjoyed my visit. I thought it was very pleasant. Let's put it this way.
There you are.
Merci, Elyse.
You are welcome, Annie.
Au revoir. Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing so, including a new one. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you have done it for a long time. You are amazing. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Alison Parle, Antonia Clark, Tom Cresswell, and Abby Jensen. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. And thank you, Paul Traynor, for increasing your pledge. This week, I did something new for my patrons. I sent out a coloring page. Photos and coloring pages will go out to all patrons, including patrons who support at the $2 a month level. This one is a coloring page of the Pont des Arts in Paris. It's full of details, a little bit tricky to do, but hey, you get a PDF so you can try it over and over again until you're happy with the results. I had to do that one over a few times myself. And, coloring is really good to do to wind down in the evening. That's what I found anyway. I hired a graphic artist to create coloring pages of France for my patrons. I think you'll enjoy them. When you're done with your chef-d'oeuvre, post it on the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, and I'd love to see it. And let your kids and grandkids do it too. They need to get to know Paris ASAP. We need more Francophiles. And a big thank you to Facebook moderators Shannon, Chris, Graydon, Jenny, Bev, Jennifer, Elizabeth, Ernesto, and Debbie. You make my life so much easier and the group a lovely place to hang out. Merci beaucoup. My thanks also to Julie Stanton for sending in a one-time donation by using the green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com that says, Tip your guide. Julie wrote, thank you for creating such a wonderful resource for travelers. Merci, Julie. Very kind of you to support the podcast. Another way to support this podcast is to hire me to be your itinerary consultant. The month of September is pretty much spoken for. If you want to do this, don't leave it till the last minute. This week, I tried to talk someone into doing fewer things on her first day in Paris, and I got to congratulate another person who is doing a great job connecting with locals. It's really fun for me speaking into a microphone right now to connect with you and talk to you directly and get to hear you and get to know you and help you, of course, prepare a great trip to France. If that's something you'd like to do, go to joinusinfrance.com/boutique. This week in French news, the trial against the terrorists who attacked the Bataclan and other targets in Paris in 2015 has started. This will probably go on for several months, and it's taking place in a special courtroom that was remodeled especially for this trial. And it's in the complex that surrounds the Saint Chapelle, which is where a lot of legal stuff happens. If you have timed tickets to visit the Sainte Chapelle in Paris, plan on at least 30 minutes for security and possibly as much as 45 minutes. The trial is designed to bring some closure, if that's possible, to the families of the victims. They've made the courtroom for them to attend the trial and testify as needed. This was France's 9/11 in many ways, and it's not something that we will ever forget. For news in English on that terrible event, you can go to France 24, so France 24, and they do their reporting in French or in English and in Arabic as well. And speaking of sobering events, we also remember the anniversary of 9/11 this week. And I remember it vividly because I was living in the US at the time. I heard a beautiful, very moving story on a podcast called Criminal about a man who made it out safe and sound out of the Twin Towers with the help of his guide dog, Roselle. The episode is named Roselle and Michael, and it just made me cry. It's both hopeful and sobering, and I recommend it. An update on what I told you last week about the Territoire des États-Unis d'Amérique on the form to apply for the French Health Pass. I was incorrect. You can select États-Unis, so only select Territoire des États-Unis if you live in Guam or in the U.S. Virgin Islands. That was a big dough for me. And if you did it wrong on my account, you need to go back to France Connect and change it to États-Unis. But at least with that portal, you can update the request, and it looks like it may speed things up if you actually check back and update the forms. I'll post a link to the form on joinusinfrance.com/354. And as you know, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, associations are huge in France. There are 1.3 million active associations in France. Associations are the place where you go hang out with people with similar interests in France. In our family, we've been involved with choir associations, several of them, basketball associations, also several of them. We looked into an association for amateur astronomers and didn't stick around because it was just not the right fit. Guide dog for the blind, where I was involved for several years. A dog agility club. My husband's in Toastmasters, and we're just a family of 3. There are associations for every hobby under the sun in France. September is the month when associative life starts up again, a time to join associations and start meeting again after the summer break. Sadly, the break has been a very long one because since March 2019, all associations had stopped all activities, and they are back in business now thanks to the Health Pass. Let me tell you how that works. I'll take the example of one of the choirs that my husband is involved in. They had an Assemblée Générale, which General Assembly is what it is, this week, where they invited all current members. Everybody got an email that they'd be checking the Health Pass at the door, and 31 people showed up, which is quite a lot for this choir. It was my husband's job to check the Health Pass when everybody arrived. He installed an app on his phone called TAC Vérif. TAC Vérif. It stands for Tous Anti-Covid Vérification. It's the same app they use at restaurants, museums, etc. The app reads QR codes. You can present the QR code either on your phone or on a piece of paper. What the person checking your Health Pass sees is the person's first and last name and their birth date. That lets them see if it's female, male, if the age seems to, fit, and whether the code is valid or not. The app does not keep track of any of this info, but only keeps stats on how many people he scanned on a given day. So if the choir gets audited, he can show that he scanned 31 people on this occasion, but he does not have a list of who he scanned. Note that the app doesn't say if the person got vaccinated or had a negative PCR test because that's private medical information. The choir cannot ask if people are vaccinated, but they can ask for a QR code for a Health Pass. It's a small distinction, but it's an important one. When choir members sign up for the year, they can volunteer the information that they are vaccinated and include a copy of that certificate with their yearly application form. But if they'd rather not do that, they can get scanned every time. It's a small group of people, easy to keep track for the choir president. With bigger groups, it's more complicated, and probably with bigger groups, they just scan it every time. And starting on October 15th, COVID tests are only going to be free if you have a prescription from your doctor. Now, visitors have had to pay for their COVID tests for a while, but people who are in the French health system haven't. But that's over now, in a month. So it's going to get expensive for people who are not vaccinated. Why is the choir so careful with this? Because for one thing, they don't want to be a super spreader event. And for another thing, they risk a big fine, about 7,500 euros, and that would wipe out their entire budget for the year because it's a small choir, it's a small community choir. But under these strict conditions, they can go back to singing again. So that's good, right? They'll sing with masks on and they'll be spaced out. They've decided that whenever weather permits, they'll practice outside. I think that's both very safe and totally reasonable. Now, not every association will be this careful, and some will get fined, I'm sure, but associations in France get funding from the city where they are, the department, the region. They know that they cannot play loose with the rules, or they will lose their funding, and more importantly, they might lose the room where they hold their events, right? Because there's a big fight every year on who's going to get the space. So they want to, be good. Or if they're not, they'll lose their stuff. 86% of eligible French people have had one dose of the vaccine and 80% have had both doses. I think the fact that tests will not be free anymore, starting in a month, will push a lot more people to do the right thing. I'm going to take a guess that by the end of the year, we'll have 95% of eligible French people fully vaccinated. So that's wonderful news for France anyway. The next huge challenge is free vaccines for everyone in the world. Both the EU and the US need to redouble their efforts to share more vaccines everywhere because there are lots of people that are ready and willing to receive them. So let's make it happen. I mentioned at the start that there is a big change concerning unvaccinated travelers from the US. This is something that people have been speculating about and setting their hair on fire that maybe they wouldn't be allowed in France anymore, blah, 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 because of the EU directive. And what I had been saying is this is not going to apply to vaccinated travelers. And it turns out I was correct. Here's a tweet from a French embassy in the US. France government organization travel update starting Sunday. So today, the day this episode comes out. From the US to France, no change for vaccinated travelers. But for non-vaccinated travelers, you need three things. 1, proof of compelling reason to enter France. 2, negative PCR test taken less than 72 hours or negative antigen test taken less than 48 hours before travel. And number 3, 7-day self-isolation on arrival. And I will link to the official announcement about that. So if you're vaccinated, you've got nothing to worry about. You can come to France. If you're not vaccinated, just get vaccinated, okay? My wonderful daughter just completed her master's degree in computer science with flying colors. The kid is so sharp. She's smarter than her mother for sure. I have asked her if she'd come on the podcast to talk about what it's like moving to France when you're 7 and then doing all your school in France. I think that will be interesting to those of you who are considering a move to France. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/354, the numeral, where you can see a recap of what we've talked about, as well as links to relevant resources. If you enjoyed the show, introduce a friend to the podcast and show them how you listen. We're everywhere. And next week on the podcast, an episode with Elyse about Bergerac, a small city near us in the southwest of France again, that I really enjoyed. And I need more trip reports. If you visited France recently or have a great topic for me, send me a line, Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.